By the mid-1970s, the streets of North America were dominated by familiar faces. General Motors had filled cities with its new-look fishbowl, a bus so common that entire generations grew up recognizing its curved glass and steady diesel hum. In Canada, Flyer Industries offered its own sturdy models, while Flexible held its share south of the border. For passengers and drivers alike, it seemed as though the transit bus landscape was already set in stone. But beneath the surface, change was brewing. Smaller Canadian cities were searching for buses sized and priced to match their needs. Transit agencies wanted options beyond the big American builders, choices that reflected local conditions and came from closer to home. At the same time, the Ontario government was determined to show that Canada could build more than just cars and trucks. It could design a transit bus that carried its own identity. It was in this atmosphere that Ontario Bus Industries, or OBI, came into being. The company's goal was ambitious: to break into a market dominated by giants and offer something different, something proudly Canadian. They saw an opening in the mid-size segment, where fleets needed buses nimble enough for crowded city streets, yet durable enough for the long haul. With support from provincial initiatives and the determination of local engineers, OBI began sketching out its first design. By 1976, that effort took shape in the form of a brand new model, the Orion I. For Canada, it wasn't simply a bus, it was a declaration. A message that the country's transit future didn't have to be imported from Detroit. It was the beginning of a story that would carry the Orion name across decades of North American transit history. From the moment the Orion I appeared, its look set it apart from the fleets already in service. Gone were the sweeping curves of GM's fishbowl or the rounded edges of earlier designs. Instead, Orion's firstborn carried a squared profile with straight window lines and a flat windshield that gave it a distinctly modern, almost utilitarian face. To some, it looked boxy. To others, it was refreshingly different. A clean break from the flowing shapes that had defined transit buses for nearly 2 decades. Beneath that appearance was a welded steel monocoque frame built for strength and durability. This construction method not only gave the bus a solid backbone, but also simplified manufacturing and maintenance. Flat body panels could be swapped or repainted with ease, reducing downtime and saving costs for transit agencies that had to keep fleets rolling day after day. Flexibility was another defining trait. The Orion I came in multiple lengths: 30 feet for smaller towns, 35 feet for mid-sized fleets, and 40 feet for big city service. Agencies could also choose between a single entry door for quieter routes or dual doors for heavy urban traffic. It wasn't a bus designed to dazzle. Instead, the Orion I's sharp lines, practical frame, and adaptable layouts spoke to OBI's philosophy. Function first, built to work, and proudly Canadian. If the body gave the Orion I its distinctive presence, the machinery beneath the floor provided the muscle to keep it moving. OBI equipped the bus with proven power plants that transit agencies already trusted, most notably Detroit Diesel's 2-stroke V-Series engines. The standard 6 V71N delivered steady performance, while the later 6 V92TA offered more horsepower and torque for heavier 40-foot models. A handful of units even carried Cummins power, giving operators another familiar option in the maintenance bay. These engines weren't groundbreaking, but they were dependable. Mechanics knew how to service them, parts were widely available, and the unmistakable growl of a Detroit diesel quickly became part of the Orion I's character. Transmission choices reinforced that practicality. Many buses left the factory with Allison automatic gearboxes, such as the VS2-8 or the robust V730, both well regarded for their smooth operation in stop-and-go city traffic. For smaller fleets or specialized orders, manual transmissions were also offered, though they were far less common. Together, these drivetrains gave the Orion I the balance it needed: enough power to handle steep grades, enough reliability to rack up thousands of daily miles, and enough familiarity that transit shops could integrate the new Canadian bus without hesitation. Power and reliability kept the Orion I on the road, but what passengers noticed most was the experience once they stepped aboard. Inside, the bus reflected the same straightforward philosophy that shaped its exterior. Seating was simple yet functional: steel frames with padded cushions arranged to maximize capacity without sacrificing too much comfort. Depending on length, the Orion I could carry between 35 and 45 riders, enough for busy urban routes but still compact for smaller communities. Large, squared windows brought in plenty of light, giving the cabin an open feel despite its modest dimensions. The flat floor and practical layout made boarding and exiting efficient, especially on dual-door models assigned to crowded downtown service. Ventilation and heating were reliable if unspectacular, designed to cope with Canada's wide range of weather conditions. What passengers remember most, though, was the soundtrack. The deep growl of the Detroit diesel at idle, rising to a throaty roar under acceleration, became the Orion I's calling card. For daily commuters, it was a familiar reminder that their bus had arrived. For enthusiasts today, that sound is inseparable from the memory of a Canadian-built machine that quietly carried millions through city streets. For all its practicality inside and out, the Orion I ultimately lived or died on who was willing to buy it. In Canada, the answer came quickly. Transit agencies from coast to coast saw value in a homegrown product, one that met their needs without relying on Detroit's supply chain. Toronto's sprawling TTC ran a number of Orion I coaches, while smaller systems in Hamilton, Mississauga, and Ottawa placed sizable orders of their own. Out west, Vancouver's fleet also included examples, proving the design could find a home in big cities as well as smaller communities. South of the border, the bus found a more limited but still noteworthy audience. Agencies in states like Michigan and New York added Orion I units to their rosters, drawn by competitive pricing and the promise of Canadian durability. California even saw a few, though American buyers often leaned toward the familiar GM or flexible brands. Production numbers never reached the astronomical heights of the fishbowl, but with more than 1,000 built between 1976 and 1984, the Orion I established itself as more than a curiosity. It became a reliable presence in Canadian transit yards, a reminder that domestic industry could step forward when given the chance. For OBI, those early orders provided the credibility and revenue needed to carry the Orion name into future generations. Once Orion I buses were in daily service, their strengths and shortcomings quickly revealed themselves. On the positive side, operators valued their affordability. Compared with American-built competitors, Orion I units often cost less upfront, a major draw for smaller agencies stretching limited budgets. The choice of lengths, 30, 35, or 40 feet, also gave agencies flexibility, letting them tailor fleets to both downtown routes and suburban runs. Mechanics appreciated the familiar Detroit diesel engines and Allison transmissions, which kept parts and expertise readily available. Flat body panels meant damaged sections could be repaired or replaced without complex fabrication, keeping downtime low. Still, the Orion I wasn't without its flaws. The squared design, while modern, lacked the visual appeal of GM's fishbowl, and sometimes drew criticism as plain. Corrosion was another issue, especially in Canadian winters where road salt could eat away at steel frames. Noise levels inside were higher than some rivals, as the powerful two-stroke diesels transmitted more vibration into the cabin. And although dependable, the buses generally didn't achieve the extraordinary longevity of GM new looks, which often served for 20 or even 30 years. For many agencies, these trade-offs were acceptable. The Orion I wasn't perfect, but it was practical, and that was enough. Despite its imperfections, the Orion I proved something that mattered far more than a flawless record. It showed that Ontario bus industries could compete. For a company starting from scratch, winning contracts in major Canadian cities and even a few across the border was no small achievement. The Orion I gave OBI the credibility it needed, carving out a place in an industry long dominated by Detroit. More importantly, it laid the groundwork for what would come next. Building on lessons learned, OBI launched the Orion II in the early 1980s, a pioneering low-floor bus for paratransit service that earned widespread recognition. Then came the Orion V, a high-floor coach that became a staple in North American fleets through the 1990s. Finally, the Orion VII carried the brand into the modern low-floor era, cementing its reputation as one of the continent's most significant bus builders. None of those later successes would have been possible without the Orion I. It established OBI as a serious player, provided revenue to expand production, and gave engineers a foundation to refine and innovate. For Canada's transit industry, it was a turning point, proof that a homegrown bus could not only survive in a tough market, but evolve into a legacy that lasted decades. Today, the Orion I is a rare sight. Most were retired by the late 1990s or early 2000s, replaced by newer Orion models or low-floor designs that better suited the needs of modern transit systems. A handful survived into preservation, tucked away in museums or kept by private collectors who recognize their historical significance. In Ontario, a few examples can still be found in transit heritage groups, occasionally brought out for special events or parades. For former drivers and riders, memories linger. Many recall the unmistakable growl of the Detroit diesel, the squared windows framing their daily commute, or the sense of pride in stepping aboard a bus built in Canada. To enthusiasts, these survivors are more than just aging machines. They are artifacts of a moment when Canadian industry declared itself on the transit stage. Though not as iconic as GM's Fishbowl or as numerous as Flyers models, the Orion I carved out its place in history. Its legacy is measured not only in the miles it traveled, but in the doors it opened for Orion and the generations of buses that followed. To understand the Orion I's place in history, it helps to measure it against the buses it shared the road with. The dominant figure was, of course, GM's new look, Fishbowl. With more than 44,000 built, it dwarfed every rival in scale. Its curved glass and unmatched longevity made it a legend. Many Fishbowls stayed in service for 3 decades or more. Against that, the Orion I could never hope to compete in numbers or mystique. Closer to home, Flyer Industries offered its D800 and later D900 series, also Canadian-built and well-suited for larger fleets. Flyers tended to win more orders from major urban systems, leaving Orion I to carve a niche with mid-sized agencies and suburban operators. South of the border, Flexible continued to sell its own new-look designs, appealing to cities that wanted an American alternative to GM. What distinguished the Orion I wasn't dominance, but difference. It filled a gap for agencies that needed something smaller, more affordable, or simply Canadian-made. It didn't match the lifespan of a Fishbowl or the polish of a Flyer, but it proved there was room for another voice in the market. In that sense, its competitors defined its limitations, but also highlighted its achievement in surviving among giants. The Orion I was never the flashiest bus on the street, nor the most celebrated. Yet it carried a quiet importance that can't be ignored. It marked the moment when Canada stepped forward with a transit bus of its own, built at home, for its own cities, and strong enough to hold its ground in a market long ruled by American giants. Without the Orion I, there would have been no Orion V roaring through the 1990s, no Orion VII shaping the low-floor era. It was the first step on a path that defined decades of Canadian transit history. How about you? Do you remember riding an Orion I, maybe in Toronto, Ottawa, or even across the border in Michigan or New York? Share your memories in the comments. We'd love to hear them. If this story brought back a moment from your past, give it a like. And don't forget to subscribe so you'll never miss the next journey through America's transit history.